Welcome back, everyone. My name is Michelle Hyde, and I'm a learning and development instructor here at MRA. And I'll be your moderator for this morning's panel discussion, Sharing the Love, Engaging the C-Suite and Beyond in Your DEIB Efforts. I'm pleased to introduce you to our three panelists. Mohammed Bey is the Vice President for Institutional Inclusion at Carroll University. Mohammed started his tenure in higher education in 2006 and has experience working in the 4-year private, public, and 2-year technical community realms. His background in higher education spans from admissions and financial aid, student affairs, academic affairs, and human resources to currently serving as a member of the President's Cabinet, overseeing efforts related to equity and social justice. Prior to 2006, Mohammed worked in manufacturing. Terry Howard is the inaugural Director of Equity at HGA. In this strategic role, she serves as a thought leader to drive equity initiatives, develop internal programming and resources, build external partnerships with diverse voices, and consult on equity and design nationally. Terry has extensive experience implementing DEI plans for nonprofit organizations, government entities, and Fortune 500 companies, including Dane County in Wisconsin, the City of New York, Hyatt Corporation, University of Wisconsin Systems, and Harris Health Systems in Harris County, Texas. And then finally, we have Erin Williams. Erin joined the Polad Company in 2021 as Chief Talent and Diversity Officer, leading DEI strategy and key talent practices across Polad companies. She has more than 20 years of experience in human resources and diversity and inclusion roles in both public and private companies, including May Company, Target, Best Buy, and Ryan Companies. Most recently, Erin led global inclusion and diversity strategies for Cargill. Welcome, Mohammed, Terry, and Erin. Let's give them some reactions to make them feel welcomed and included.
Good
Excellent.
morning.
Thank you so much. So wonderful to have you all here with us today. We look forward to jumping in. So, our first question here, you all are fairly new in your current respective roles. We have a wealth of experience and information here, but in your current roles, you're a little bit newer. So, would love to hear from each one of you individually. What has your journey with your fellow leadership look like since starting in your current role? Erin, let's start with you, and then we'll go Mohammed, then Terry.
Yes. Good morning. Again, Erin Williams with Polad Companies, and I've now been with Polad Companies a little over 2 years. And so that's how long the journey's been with me. Now they've started the journey a little bit prior to me. To give you a little context of our organization, I am a part of the parent company. So we have several different companies that fall into our company, and within those companies, they are in a variety of different industries. I would say each of those companies themselves were on different journeys. They have a diverse group of employees. They are in different locations across the country. So in starting our journey, you can understand how it's a little bit complicated. But in that, when I started, there was, to my benefit, what we called an executive, a DEI strategy committee. And that was the committee that even elected to hire me into the role that I was in. So it started with that committee and understanding where they were in their journey and their expectations and what they wanted to accomplish within the organization. But we really also wanted to hear from our employees. So during the first, few months of the organization, I met with a variety of employees within the organization, employees individually from all across all of our different companies that, again, roll up into our larger company, small focus groups, mid-level managers. We also met with the strategic committee itself, but then also our board. And in those particular conversations, there were a couple of things that I wanted to tackle. I know that there are goals and best practices that are typically shared externally. But I wanted to understand, what did it mean for our own employees internally? And so some of the questions that we talked about was their definition of diversity, their definition of belonging, their definitions of inclusion, not the definitions found on Google or on everyone's website, but what did it really mean to them? And we started those conversations by asking, what did it look like? When you walk the halls of our building, what does diversity look like? Not just representation, but they talked about when you go into the lunchroom, who's sitting at the table with who? You know, what does it look like when you're in a meeting? What does it feel like? How do you feel when you're getting dressed in the morning and you have to drive to work? What does that look like? What does it sound like? What are you hearing from your peers? What are you hearing from your managers? What are you hearing from leadership? And we really got into the context of not just, I think, the saying, but how we really wanted to live and how we wanted it to breathe within our organization. And it was with those words of those employees that I brought it back to our leadership to say, yep, here's what you thought it looked like, but here's how our employees are expecting us to show up. And we really talked about those differences and our commitment and what commitment meant. And that actually brought upon what we consider our promise statement. It's our promise statement to our employees of how we're going to go about this, how we're going to include them, and it's also how we're going to hold ourselves accountable. And that's kind of how we started our journey as an organization a few years ago. We still stand behind the goals of those promise statements. Now we've since evolved to, hey, here's how we hold ourselves accountable internally, to some work now of what we're doing externally. So how are we showing up in the community? How is the community seeing our organization and the impact that we're having within the community? And so we've really started to transition to that part of our journey. But that's really how we started and what we try to hold ourselves up to.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Erin.
Mhm.
Mohammed, how about you?
Aaron, you touched on some good points about really making it mission driven and getting to know the organization. So very much kudos to you for doing that. I know for me, I've been at Carroll University for less than 2 years. I started May of 2022. As Michelle said, I've been in higher education for a little bit of time now. And coming to Carroll, coming back into the private sector of higher education, I really spent some time focused on culture, history. I am the inaugural vice president for institutional inclusion. There are 7 other senior leaders or vice presidents plus the president who are helping to move the university forward. The school has been around since 1846, Wisconsin's first private institution for higher learning, first institution for higher learning in general. And what I've been doing is really understanding our Presbyterian heritage and driving the work of social justice through that lens, letting people know that this work really started in 1846. And as I've been mapping out the history from 1911, when we had our first international student organization on campus, to present day, there has been movements of women's movements, movements for people of color, movements for different identities and backgrounds, disabilities, and so forth. And making sure I am charting that out and telling the story of who the university is, to not make it seem like it just started. I mean, quite frankly, it's been here, and now I'm here to help bring it to give it more light and more attention. So focusing on the culture and history, and then also personality and coalition building. I'm very much driven to understand people's personalities and what makes them tick and their reason behind doing this work, and where do they see themselves, what are their biases, what are their backgrounds, how are they showing up as a colleague to do this work, and not just from the employee standpoint, but understanding where our students are as well, our graduate and undergraduate students, and what are their experiences, and to really build coalition and understanding of where people want to take the work. And also going back to our alumni, some have had positive experiences at the university and some have not. And then taking it to the trustees, as Aaron also articulated, working with the board of directors. We have a trustees here at our university, and I need and continue to need to understand where they're coming from. What are their personalities and perceptions with this work? At the end of the day, do they have our back? Are they going to stand up when social rhetoric is saying one thing about diversity work and generalizing, where at Carroll, ours is mission driven, tied to our Presbyterian heritage, our organization's values? Are they going to have our back? And then from there, priorities and planning. So as I said, I'm really driven around understanding personalities. I've been spending some time with our leadership team. We have a President's Leadership Council made up of the senior leadership team, plus the next level down folks, and really working with them to understand what behaviors really help drive an organization as it relates to the work around equity and social justice. What can we help identify and bring back to the employee, back to our workforce and to our students to really get them to all buy into this, a set of behaviors that we feel can help drive our university forward. And so we've been working on crafting those, and I have a draft already in place, and I'll be taking that to the street to get feedback from other folks from around the university so we can all agree on what are our expectations as folks coming to our campus, whether they're working or whether they're students, so we can all get on the same page.
Outstanding, Mohammed. Thank you so much. And Terry, how about you? What's your journey with your fellow leadership look like since starting in this role?
And excuse me, I'm suffering with a little cold, but we're going to get through this. I would say, much like Mohammed, I too have a 2-year tenure so far, and in an inaugural role for HGA. Just to level set, HGA is an interdisciplinary design firm, so architects, engineers, and interior designers. So the fact that this industry took a step forward to say we are committed to equity, I think is noteworthy. So when I think about the journey that we continue to be on today, I think about 3 guiding principles, right? And that's commitment, collaboration, and communication. I am a part of the executive management team, which in some ways is a commitment that this role is important to our firm. We're talking about 13 offices across the United States, and where individual offices are, very much to Aaron's point, look very different, right? Where our offices are, for example, in California, they're like, what's taking you so long? Our offices in the Midwest are like, what is this? Because this is new, and hold my hand step by step. So a commitment also to meet people where they are. In terms of collaboration, it's really been about making sure we're all on the same page, whether that is creating a similar vocabulary and language when we talk about equity at HGA, or simply as we discuss certain issues around equity as it relates to design, that we're all singing from the same hymn book. And then finally, constant communication. We can't just send out a micro training and think that that's all we need to do to talk about mansplaining in the workplace, right? It takes a little bit more than just a 5-minute training to help people understand the connection between equity and the work that people do on a daily basis. So I would say that sums up what our leadership connection has been over the last 2 years. But understand that this work did not start with my role. There was a grassroots effort that said, hey, we need to prioritize this as a part of what we do. So I'm now the vehicle by which that can be strategized, but also from an operational standpoint, how it manifests itself in real work at HGA.
Outstanding. Thank you so much. It sounds like it has been a very busy 2 years for all of you here and a very productive 2 years at that. So thank you for everything that you're doing for your organizations. Um, So I'm hearing some themes already as we're starting to talk here, themes on consistency, trying to create consistency across your enterprise, trying to find definition. What does this mean to us? What do all of sort of the terminologies mean to us? Um, Sometimes it can feel really overwhelming when we're first starting a job to even identify, where do I start? Where do I even begin? And so I'm interested in how you went about identifying those priorities and initiatives for the leadership to support. I know, Aaron, you had talked about doing kind of this listening tour almost. What else did you do to kind of weave the leadership in and say, what are the things that you see as the biggest priorities here? We'll go ahead and start with Aaron, and then we'll do the same, Mohammed, then Terry.
Yeah. So as I mentioned before, the listening tours really did serve as the impetus to where we started when we came up not only with our promise statement, but ultimately what we consider the focus areas within our organization. So we still drive with our goals that we set as an organization. One is to ensure that we have representation that mirrors the communities we do business, for example. Another is that sense of belonging and ensuring that every employee has an equitable opportunity to succeed within our organization. And last is making sure that we are building mutually beneficial partnerships within the communities, again, that we're doing business. And so that was really kind of the groundwork that we started the conversations. In addition to that, it's about learning, right? We aren't the only ones on the journey, and we aren't going to have all of the answers. So how do we reach out to our peer networks, to others in the industry, to others that have made progress, even learn from maybe some of the obstacles or pitfalls that others have made. So it was having even those experts come in and speak with some of our teams and give us some of that guidance that we might need. But it also meant that I had the opportunity to sit down with each of our business and our business leaders to understand their strategic priorities. You know, you have some businesses who were in the middle of going through growth within their organization. And how do we tie our efforts into what they're doing? If growth means you're hiring, which means that I can go and recruit some great diverse talent out there, right? But you have other parts of our organization where maybe that growth wasn't the focus. Maybe it was new leadership. That means there's going to be a change in culture. That might be a change in vision. How do we integrate what we're doing into what's important into that part of the organization? But in order for me to help guide and consult or find the resources or be there for that organization, I had to understand what they were going through as a business and what their priorities were as a business. So that took some work and research and understanding on my side as well. In addition to, I think, going out there and just sharing, these are the typical best practices that everyone was doing. We had to find what was right. That being said, we did, again, focus on 5 focus areas. One was hiring great talent, right? The next was growing that talent, building that inclusive culture, ensuring that we had equitable policies and procedures within our organization. So making sure, you know, you're looking at pay and, you know, those types of things. And then finally, again, that ensure that we're volunteering in our community, ensuring that we're doing supplier diversity within the community. So looking at all of those. Now, as I mentioned earlier, each of our businesses are in different places. They have different strategic priorities. We didn't necessarily require all of the businesses to boil the ocean, as what I say, because sometimes it causes them to be paralyzed, right? So we then encourage them to pick your top 2 or 3 where you're going to go far, you're going to go narrow, and you're going to go deep, and you're going to make an impact that way. And so that is how most of our businesses tie those focus areas to their strategic priorities as a business and kind of where we start. But we do measure all of those focus areas across all of our businesses holistically as well.
Love it. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Mohammed, how about you?
I'm in the process of laying out the blueprint to be able to to begin this work? And I'll start by saying we already have a strategic plan, our pioneer-driven plan. And within that, President Nadir and the leadership team at that time identified one of the 4 buckets to focus on enriching the Carroll experience, achieving academic excellence through inclusive excellence. And so if folks are aware of the work around IE, there are normally there are about 5 buckets or so related to IE. And it's really a model or framework that people can adopt to impact organizational change. It has really an OD lens to that approach. So for me, what I've been doing is I have a team that I lead. And well, one thing I want to preference is that being the vice president for institutional inclusion and diversity work, it's just not about that. It's about being the vice president for the entire organization. And so depending on where your organization is, what are the hot butts topics? Is it budget? Is it personnel or whatnot? Your priorities could also shift based on where the organization is going and what it currently needs. And so now going back to my areas, I have a division that I manage, focusing on institutional inclusion. And so in the spring of 2024, what I am preparing the organization to do, based on the resources and skill set of my team, is that we have our own action planning work that we'll be doing in the spring of 2024 and that we already did this past fall. I also have a council for institutional inclusion that will create an action plan and identify work. And for the rest of the university, I've been putting together a framework with feedback from the leadership team around what do those buckets look like. So I'm taking the pioneer-driven plan, that bucket focusing on enriching the Carroll experience, and I'm expanding that to invite the rest of the university in to engage and work around inclusive excellence. And then I will be providing some parameters as far as what that can look like for faculty, what can that look like for said department, and to give some guidance and resources and tools. And I'm going to invite the departments to identify between 1 to 3 goals that they want to bring forward and focus on for the upcoming fiscal year. And me and my team will act as a consultant and a resource for those conversations and tools that people may need. I really want them to identify the work that's most relevant to them rather than having me come in and say, hey, this is what we're going to do. I mean, don't get me wrong. There are some things that we are going to do, like focus on hiring, focusing on training and development, scholarship, and so forth. But I want folks to be able to understand the data that's relevant to their experience, to their department, to the work that they're doing, strategize, have conversations, bring us in and identify a goal. And then my work would be collecting that, putting out a plan late spring that is all encompassing for every end of the university to engage in this work.
Wonderful. Terry.
Again, I think I cheated off of Aaron and Mohammed's paper because some of the best practices mentioned by both of them are certainly the route that we have taken at HGA, but through a series of focus groups and town hall meetings and surveys, I just went on a listening tour to find out from the workforce, or certainly a good sampling of them, what they wanted equity to be at HGA. Through that, we've developed a strategy, which consists of 5 pillars, including building upon internal capacity. Some of the great things that Aaron mentioned are similar in terms of recruitment, hiring, onboarding, retaining, policy development, awareness, training, that kind of thing, are all in that first pillar. And then the second pillar is around authentic partnerships. So that is what we refer to as our diversity supplier program, that it's not just picking a firm to work with because they are minority owned, for example. But what's the benefit? What's the mutual benefit in doing so? And why is that going to be a differentiator for HGA, right? And then there's thought leadership. I mentioned earlier that our industry is far behind in some of the best practices around equity. So how do we begin to tell our stories in a meaningful way? So that is an intentional piece of moving the needle forward at HGA. Then it's, of course, our pro bono work, our community action group, our how do we help support communities where we occupy space in a meaningful way. So if we're going to do a volunteer project, let's make sure that it's addressing a disparity that exists in the community, for example. So just making those decisions a little meaningful. And then finally, that all culminates into the work that we do every day. So putting an equity lens to the design process from the time we pursue a project to post-occupancy. What does that mean? So how are we looking at our design teams? How are we doing meaningful engagement with stakeholders that will actually occupy that space that we're designing? So all of those 5 pillars continue to tie into our overall firm-wide strategy in terms of focus, priority focuses in a meaningful way. So that's how we've been able to integrate equity into our overall strategic plan.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So identifying the priorities are sort of the first step. Then we have to take action on it, right? Then it's actually making things happen. And we're getting some questions in the chat here on, and this is for anybody here. How have you leaned on your leadership team to operationalize DEIB? How did you get them engaged? What did you ask them to do? What have been your very specific examples of asks like, hey, this is where I need your support?
I can start out this one and just say,
Please.
in every way. Right? So,
bring on the help, right?
Right. So certainly one of the statements that I made, even in the interview process, was if you don't want this really done, if you want this to be like a check the box kind of thing, I'm not the person to help you out with that, right? Because we're going to get it done together. So it's been that kind of commitment, as I said, from the onset. I actually came in and ensured that every person in the leadership team, as well as the board of directors, took the IDI, that's the Intercultural Development Inventory, to see where they were on the cultural competence continuum, if you will. And that was important to say, look at yourself first, because if you're going to contribute, you have to know where your competencies are and where they are not, and continue to look at developing those skills and find resources to support you. So that's one way. And then as I look at the 5 pillars, obviously I'm not HR. I'm not a part of HR. So I have to collaborate with HR to get those things done that we think are important in equity. I'm not a part of the design team. I'm not an architect, an engineer, or an interior designer. But I have to collaborate with that group to start talking about how to apply that lens in the work that they do. So when I say, everywhere, that's where I collaborate with not only the leaders, but the practitioners, even at that level from an operational perspective, to get the job done.
Terry, for me, what you said when you were interviewing, being upfront about that, I think for folks that are new to this work, that I'm at that stage in my career that's definitely something I am upfront about. Do not waste my time. I do not want to waste the organization's time. So if y'all don't want to walk the walk and talk the talk, then I can go somewhere else. I will add that for me, it's been about relationship building with the leaders. Mm-hmm. So again, understand where they're coming from, what their backgrounds are, what their gaps from a development standpoint are. That relationship building piece gives me the opportunity then to ask even more challenging questions and to push them in a direction that that might make them uncomfortable, whether it's in a meeting when we're all together in that same space, or whether it's outside of a meeting. I have a unique role focused on relationship building. And so when I go then for those asks or to lean on them, that relationship is solid and it's there. And we have something that's a little bit more beyond than just being colleagues. It's about that development journey. And it's been this vice versa. And so I've gotten myself out of the office into other people's spaces, getting to understand kids, whether it's a barbecue, stepping out for a non-alcoholic beverage, haha, after work or something like that. Really about forming that team, because we are in the trenches together and I need them at the table. And I can say that my leadership team, that the folks that I'm currently serving with, I feel I don't have to look over, I don't have to worry. They're at the table and they're willing to put the work in and strategize. And when this effort gets rolled out in the spring, all of them are at the table. The provost is already trying to look at embedding DEI work into the academic reviewing process. And so he and I have been having conversations about that, which spun off of the relationship that I've been building with him on his professional journey.
Excellent. Thank you. Erin, anything else to add here?
Yeah, I want to piggyback again. I think we all might be having the same note sheets as Terry mentioned earlier. We also had our leadership take the IDI to help them understand where they were on their journey. And I do think that that is a great way, both for you as a practitioner who are helping them on their journey, understand where to start from, but also it challenged our leaders. I think some maybe thought, hey, I was here, but in reality, here's the work that I need to do. But to piggyback off of that, I am also of the philosophy, what gets measured gets done.
Mm-hmm.
So we are very much where we can data driven, and data is not great unless you share it with others, right? So being very transparent with that data. And I will say, amongst the different businesses, to see where each of them are, that can also be sometimes a motivation to say, you know what, if my peers can do it, then I can do it too. The other thing that I would say in terms of helping to operationalize it is accountability. So it's DEI just shouldn't be on my goals and objectives for the year. It should be on anyone who has that type of influence within the organization. So our board has a DEI goal and objective, or our executive team, and then also all of the presidents. And when it's, on their goals and objectives, it tends to stay top of mind, but not top of mind with me. I do meet with our CEO formally once a month, but quite regularly. And it's him who reaches out to say, where are you with your DEI goals? It's one of our board members who is also one of my champions who asks and gets an update. And when you have those kinds of conversations and they see that commitment is not just coming from HR, you tend to, be a little bit more active, or at least be a little bit more prepared. And then finally, it goes back to what I think we shared earlier. Whenever you can tie these efforts to business goals, it helps as well. So because if you don't, the first time there's competing priorities or there's opposing points of view, it's the first thing to go. But if you could tie it to what they're trying to achieve as a business objective, and you weave it into that, either that training or that growth strategy, then it tends to be sustainable over time.
Excellent. Love that. Mohammed, please.
There's a piece in the chat, and Michelle, forgive me, that Lisa had mentioned about adding it to people's agendas. And that's a great idea. That to Erin's point and Terry and my point, it's not just about, it's beyond us. It should be everyone's job. And so infusing it into an agenda, having it listed on there, and figuring out what the topic is going to be, or just keeping it an open floor conversation is worthwhile. And that definitely does help.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Well, Erin, you set me up so well. Plus, our friends in the chat here have also asked some questions about metrics. You knew it was coming, and here it is. We know that numbers talk. So if you all could give some examples of what sort of metrics, what are you tracking? What are you measuring right now And what were the metrics that really spoke to your leadership? Erin, because you had just talked about, tying it to the business goals, if you could give some specifics, that would be fantastic.
Yeah. And so here's what I will say. Numbers talk, but stories talk louder. All right.
Mm,
So whenever you share the numbers, make sure that you're giving the context and the stories behind it. Otherwise, I don't want DEI to be just a number.
mhm.
So I do share that data is important, but you have to give some context behind that data. That being said, we do our own quarterly reports with some of the standard, numbers, whether it be representation, turnover, promotion rates, hire rates, those types of things. But an example of putting the story behind it, when I'm talking about turnover or the great talent that's left, did you know that it was so-and-so who's left, right? But they were a great talent. Here's what they how they added value to the organization. And let's talk about why we were unable to keep them or retain them within our organization. And what can we do to make it better? So that it's not just or sharing the story itself, but what was it behind the story? What's behind the numbers? Other things that we do, we have a pulse survey. So every so many months, we check in with our employees about their experiences within the organization. We do have a pulse survey specifically to diversity, equity, inclusion, in which we measure our progress in terms of, again, how our employees feel, in terms of, do they feel like they belong within the organization? Do they feel like they have the opportunity to add the value they want to add within our organization? What can we do better? Do they feel psychologically safe within our organization? And if not, why not? So those types of questions are in the pulse survey, and we look at that data. But in all of our pulse surveys, we also disaggregate the data by gender. We disaggregate it by tenure, by generation, by different parts of our organization, to see if there are communities that are having different experiences from other communities, and how do we tackle those experiences should those gaps show up. So that's some of the things that we measure. We do measure funding for the community and how much we donate, volunteer hours, those types of things. We do pay equity. But not just when we look at pay, do we look at pay, in terms of salary or that type of thing. But when we do our annual review, and we are on a singular annual review, I know others might be quarterly, we also look at scores. So if you look at your scores, how are the scores for women versus men and for different groups, to make sure that there's not bias in that process. We also look at merit increases. Are we giving, because most managers might have an option of a range. Who's really getting that further range versus the earlier range? And so we do want to look at different pieces in terms of what the numbers are telling us, but then we also try to go behind the story to really bring it to life, so that they understand the impact, not just the numbers themselves.
Wonderful. Thank you. Let's go to Terry next.
I
What are
would
you measuring?
say that, I work for a professional services firm, and at the end of the day, it's how many billable hours can you have?
Mhm.
So I've taken that metric lens and tried to apply a business case in terms of metrics. So today, for example, when we have shared our stories about equity at conferences and other events, it's not necessarily tied to additional business. So we're trying to create some connections in that way. We also are getting to the point where we can say having an equity lead on a design team garnered higher ratings from the client at the end of the project. Those things are important for the people who are like, equity is a cost center, right?
Mhm.
Because we need to now make a case and prove that equity is not just a cost center, but rather a revenue generator for the firm. So working in that part. But also internally, it's how can we create trainings that are competency based, right? No, doesn't mean that you soak it all in, but at least you needed 80%. So that might mean going back and revisiting content again and again. So we are able to track those numbers. We are able to track numbers who attended our lunch and learns. But that is one piece that just needs to be emphasized much more in our firm. I will tell you that in 2024, one of my initiatives will be to create a dashboard so that our internal workforce can see how we're moving the needle. So working really with IT right now to create that dashboard so that people can have real-time information beyond just the logistical numbers that Aaron spoke to, getting beyond that going forward.
Excellent. Thanks. Mohammed, anything else to add to that?
Not much. Like Aaron mentioned, the pulse surveys, we do climate surveys over here. For us, from a student standpoint, retention and graduation rates. I think one of the things that I've always wanted to do, but I'm also not leery about it, but I haven't, right now, I'm too new to the role or just fresh here, is to figure out how can you assess and evaluate folks that have gone through a transformational learning DEIB experience, whether it's a set amount of hours that you have created for this program and comparison to those who haven't, and to see how those interactions are happening within the departments to really help make the case for the value add of the work. But then that can also come back to bite you in the butt. So I'm just been going back and forth with that idea. Other items that we have from a faculty standpoint, of course, class evaluations and things of that nature. But outside of that, nothing new. I will say getting percentages are great, but if you can actually, going back to what Aaron was saying, in a way, use actual numbers, that also helps people to understand their bodies there versus a percentage.
Mhm. Absolutely. Thank you. And I love, Aaron, your point about kind of, associating a story with it, getting both that head and that heart tied in. Some people are head people, some people are heart people, and to balance both of those, I think is really important. All right. So last formalized question here. If you could leave our participants with one piece of advice today, what would be the most impactful best practice to engage the C-suite in our DEIB efforts? And I'll let you arm wrestle for who goes first.
I'm happy to start the
Thanks,
discussion
Terry.
because I think my message is both simple and complex, and that is to allow grace.
Mm.
Allow yourself grace, knowing that you are not going to boil the ocean in 18 months, and that this is an ongoing journey for you as a professional in this space. But also allow others grace. People don't know what they don't know. And so often it's about meeting people where they are. So my friends in California, I'm like, keep going, I'm catching up with you. And my people in the Midwest, I'm like, just dip your toe in the water and see how it feels, right? So I think grace is really important in order to make this work. And then finally, I would just add to Mohammed's earlier comment on nurturing relationships. I know I'm a better person for engaging with people who are not like me. So how can we take that philosophy internally to our workforce, externally to our communities, and externally to our clients moving forward? Thanks.
That's beautiful, Terry. Thank you so much. Aaron,
I'll
would you
jump
like to go
in.
next? Great.
I think I would leave the audience with the concept that if you know better, you do better.
Mm.
So, this is a journey. It's a journey where I'm still learning. It's a journey where our community of leaders are still learning. It's a community, it's a journey where our employees are still learning. But if we all at least have a mindset that we're willing to learn, that we're willing to work together, and that we are willing to make progress, and we want to make and are committed to making progress together, we're going to come up against a lot of bumps, a lot of obstacles. But if we have that mindset, I think we can continue to move forward. And so anything and everything that we can do within our organization and our efforts to continue to just support that education and that journey, I think is a win for us as well.
Great. Thank you so much. Mohammed, how about you?
I was going to mention the relationship piece, but Terry took it.
You can say it again. It's that important.
There I go cheating again.
I love the fact that there's themes between all of us. I'm just going to leave y'all with this. I will never work for an organization that does not have a DEIB officer at the C-suite level. I'm so done with that. So my advice to all of you who may not be reporting or at the C-suite level, y'all got to get there. Because if you're reporting to a vice president who's reporting to a president or CEO, look, they got 60 minutes with that CEO to talk about prioritization. And if you're a DEIB officer reporting to that vice president, everything that you might be, that you hope to get across up to the CEO may not get there, because that vice president is also competing with other areas to bring information forward. It is important that these roles be at the C-suite executive level to have that pulse within the organization and to strategize and to help move things forward.
Great. Thank you. I saw another, while we have just a few more minutes here, we want to squeeze every minute out of this. Someone in the chat had said that DEIB often gets stuck on the D, that visible sort of representation. And so Aaron, I know you had shared with us while we were preparing for today a great initiative that your organization has done. The question was, how do we move beyond just that visible diversity? And I think your example is so strong with that. If you wouldn't mind sharing what you all did last week.
Yeah, so to that point, and that point has been raised even in our pulse survey, which is when you're doing this work, how do all employees see themselves in this work? And that's an important question. But to your earlier point, last week I had the opportunity to take, this is now our third group of leaders, again, who are all at the executive level, on what we call a racial justice tour. And so we have the opportunity to go to Atlanta in Alabama for a series of 3 to 4 days. We partnered with the Center of Economic Inclusion. They really do some great work in the racial justice space. And we have the opportunity to visit a number of very important memorials when it comes to racial justice, whether that be Martin Luther King and his efforts, the Legacy Museum that really talks about, taking it from slavery all the way to incarceration. The point of taking them there, though, is to help them understand the history, which many of our leaders may not have the understanding of. It's the concept of how do they help me solve a problem if they don't really understand the problem? So that's really what is the context, and we really dig into that, but also show how that mindset that occurred in the past, how it still shows up today, and how it might show up today in our own processes and our own internal efforts without us even knowing about it. So that's one of the efforts that we do, but we try to do a series of different efforts for different levels of the organization, so that our employees can really see themselves in this space and see themselves in this work, and then they are more invested and willing to, I think, engage in the conversation, in the discussion, in the work.
Outstanding. And I heard sort of the theme of the history coming back in, Mohammed, all the way back from your introduction, where you talked about this idea of this isn't a new thing. This is something that we've been working on for a really long time. So I just want to take a moment to thank you all so much for sharing your wisdom with us, your experience with us. It has been so fantastic to learn from you. And we really appreciate you joining us today. So at this time, we're going to go ahead and head into a break until 11:25. You can close out of your window and join us back for the closing keynote by clicking on that session at the agenda page. Thank you again, panelists, and thank you everyone for joining us. Have a wonderful rest of your conference. Thanks so much, everyone.